All right, you're rolling.
Let us pray. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Today's reading comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 32, verses 22 to 32. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and he sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And so he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you asked my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip socket at the thigh muscle. The word of God for the people of God. Growing up, there was nothing more embarrassing and terrifying for me than hearing my name. My last name for many was not an easy pronunciation, McAlintal. I will admit, you probably wouldn't be able to nail it on the first try. If you say it fast enough, you might think I have some Irish blood in me. You wouldn't be the first. McAlintal sounded foreign to nearly everyone else around me. The way that my counselors, teachers, and coaches, and even my friends would say it, constantly reminded me that I was different from everyone else. Even though I was born in Jersey City, went to Catholic school, spoke English, was raised on Power Rangers, Nickelodeon, and the Backstreet Boys, I was still different. I remember one summer I attended a day camp, and the counselor did the roll call, and when it came to my name, McAlintal, he struggled and laughed, and all the other campers laughed along with him. I remember what it meant to be an outsider. I became so ashamed of my name that I wanted to change it so bad so that I wouldn't be seen as different. Today, I want us to reconsider the importance of our names and what they mean. We know names are important, right? The first question we ask people is like, "Hey, what's your name?" We get embarrassed when we forget them, and we figure out ways of getting people to say what their name is. The classic move being, "Hey, let me introduce you to my friend so that I can hear what their name is, so that way I don't get like revealed as somebody I totally forgot who Jack was." Our names are how we present ourselves to the world, but they also carry layers of complexity and meaning. They are the embodiment of who we are, hope to be, prophecies and legacies strung together by sounds, letters, and vowels. They carry the histories and stories of those who came before us. And in a lot of ways, they lay forth the trajectory of our lives. Our names are what the world will remember us by. In today's reading, we hear the story of Jacob as he wrestled with the divine at Peniel. While we don't know much about the fight of itself, we do know that afterwards Jacob did ask for a blessing. And instead, this mysterious figure gave Jacob a new name, Israel. Israel, meaning to contend with God, or as I see it, to struggle with God. He was named this because he has striven with God and with humans and prevailed. I think a lot about what Jacob went through in that fight. He struggled with the divine, but I don't think he knew it at first. Jacob sent his family away because he knew that he was going to face Esau, his greatest challenge, the embodiment of all of his actions and moves up until that moment. He had no idea what he was going to face until he saw this man waiting for him. I can only imagine that Jacob just saw this man as a threat to his family. And so he had to fight. Jacob wrestled with what he thought was a man throughout the night, fighting so hard because he knew that something was at stake. At a certain point, I believe that Jacob wasn't only struggling to protect his family, but he was struggling inside with all of the actions leading him up to this point. Before Jacob was the contender, he was the usurper, the trickster. In Hebrew, Jacob means to take the place of, to supplant. He was the one who tricked his brother into giving him his riches, and the son who made his father give him over his brother's blessings. As he began the journey to face Esau, he knew that one day he would have to pay for what he had done. And so he struggled and fought with this man. He struggled and wrestled with his regret, remorse, and demons of his own, unwilling to yield to the power that they held over him. How often have we faced this struggle? How often have we found ourselves grappling with the difficulties in our lives, the pains and the torments that drive us crazy? How long do we wrestle with these matters before we realize that we have been struggling with God? Jacob didn't know whom he was wrestling with until his hip socket was hit out of place. And then dawn broke. It was not until he was injured, out of the darkness and into the light, did he know exactly what was happening. And at that very moment, Jacob was given a new name. The name bestowed him upon by the divine signifies a change in his life, for his family, and ultimately his destiny. Israel, the name that birthed a nation, God's chosen people into the world, a people who, like their father, would continuously struggle with God. There is a difference, I think, then, in the ways that others give us names and the names that God gives us. When we name something, we validate its existence. We recognize that it is in the world, that it is present, and that it is active. We name our fears, our worries, and our anxieties, and sometimes those things become who we are. We define our names by the worst parts of ourselves. I'm not good enough. I don't belong here. I am too different. At times, we name ourselves as less than what God calls us to be. But when God speaks, God creates. The God we believe in does not speak nor create from fear or anxiety. God speaks from desire, a desire to have us into the world as we are. God longs for us to be a part of creation so deeply that God created each and every one of us individually. And our names serve as the very first glimpse of our place in God's creation. When a baby is born, the first thing that people ask is, what did you name them? What's the name that you gave them? What will you call them? Well, I share the same name with my father. When I was younger, my mother told me that I was not named after my dad, but rather God had told her to name me Michael. Our names are markers that each of us are wonderfully made in the image and the likeness of God. At the beginning of creation, we hear God speak humanity's existence into the world through Adam. Through Adam, we are reminded that we are made of the earth and brought into reality by God's will and very breath. The names that God gives us and the names we give ourselves give shape to our destiny as well as to our calling into the world. I found out recently that Makalintal is a tribal name that descended from the Lacandula kingdom in the Philippines, a pre-colonial kingdom that ruled over a majority of the country before Spanish colonists came and invaded. Many tribes loyal to the kingdom had to change their names in order to escape Spanish persecution. Some kept the ending of their original names Dula, as a sign that they remained loyal to the kingdom. Others, including my ancestors, had to change their surnames completely in order to remain safe from the colonists. But rather than change it to a Spaniard name, my ancestors chose to keep a part of their tribal name, proudly remaining Makalintals, to be marked. This meant that we were seen, we were validated, we were chosen. To be marked was an act of resistance, of struggle against the people who came and invaded their land, their culture, their identity. To be marked became a signal, an inheritance of my ancestry that reminds me of the 500 years of resistance that rests on my family's shoulders. To be marked is not a sign of shame, but of strength and survival. makalinto, is to be like Jacob after the battle with the divine. It is the joint socket hit out of place that represents the strength and the will of my people. To be marked is a reminder that, yes, we were chosen. Eleazar Fernandez wrote that Filipino-American theology is rooted in the struggle. The struggle for liberation from our oppressors, for an identity, for a proclamation that we are God's own. Our names remind us that we belong to God because God named us. I learned that my name meant to be marked with resilience, strength, purpose, and belonging. Jacob, the trickster, the smooth talker, the finesser, the usurper. That very night, he was given a new name that would forever remind him that he fought with God and prevailed. Even though he prevailed every time someone called him Israel, he was reminded of the battle that he had with himself. That reminder was a testament that he had overcome his fears, his regrets, and prevailed against his own demons. I came home from camp that day, and I told my mom what had happened with the camp counselor. Needless to say, she was furious. And so the next morning, she busted into that building with more fire and anger and rage than I have ever seen my mother. And she told the camp counselor, "This is my son's name. You will pronounce it correctly. You will say it right, and you will make sure that no one ever makes fun of him for it ever again. Remember it. Remember it. Remember your name, for it is evidence of God's divine work in you." After this, I began to take hold of my names as one that has been marked, acknowledging that the name I carry is the name I carry for my home, my family, my people. The names we are given lay down histories and meanings and lay forth a vision of things not yet seen. Our names have the power to tell stories, create lineages. They are tributes to the past and oracles of the future. We must remember that who we are called to be begins with who God names us to be. And we are God's own. Who are you called to be? Who are you called to become? And who are you carrying with you as you move through this world? Amen.
Amen. Take a few minutes and make some comments for Mike.